views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronxtalk. The city's comptroller is our guest tonight. We have many important subjects to ask him about. We're going to talk about the bloated economics of the city's homeless programs and ask if maybe there's another way to handle it. We'll also talk about the idea of closing Rikers Island. Also, how a Trump presidency could affect the city budget and what the ultimate effect that would have on city programs, and a wide variety of other subjects. If you have questions or comments about anything you hear on tonight's show, send an email to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org or post them on our Facebook page, or send us a tweet at BronxTalk, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. For the here and now, the comptroller of the city of New York, the Honorable Scott Stringer. Nice to have you back.
Great to be back tonight.
We have a lot to cover in a short amount of time. There are an incredible 70,000 people in the shelter system. We house some of them in hotel shelters that costs $629 each room, $400,000 for the city per day. Seems ridiculous. You called for a roadmap to tackle homelessness. What should the city do?
Well, look, we have actually 60,000 people in our homeless shelters.
I exaggerated.
No, but it could easily be 70,000 months from now. Half of that population, almost half, are children, and we're warehousing homeless people in commercial hotels when we shouldn't be. We are putting people in dangerous shelter conditions. My audits have said that people are in fact living in dangerous situations, thousands of violations. We have people in cluster sites with bad landlords who have a lot of violations on the building. In short, the homeless among us are vulnerable in the shelter system. The expansion of commercial hotels, now 5,881 people in those hotels, this is not the way to solve the homeless crisis. And most importantly, the people in the hotels, now there's 2,500 families, meaning children in these commercial hotels with no services. This is an outrage. And we need a transparent roadmap from City Hall that's going to fight to make sure that we insist that our homeless population is safe, and there's a plan to reduce the homeless population.
This is certainly one of the topics the mayor has taken a pretty good hit on, or hits on, if you will. What would you want to see in that roadmap that would work? It's very easy to, I realize it's the comptroller's job to analyze the numbers, but once you've done that, would you make a suggestion, and what do you think the mayor ought to do?
Listen, my job as controller is to audit and investigate city agencies. That's what I do. But I also understand that you have to put forth ideas to solve problems, and that's how we work with the mayor. But I think that we have to be first and foremost more vigilant in our approach to this. There has to be an urgency of now. But here's a couple of things. First, we need to hold landlords accountable because right now, when you get a link voucher, you're a homeless family, you get a voucher to rent an apartment. These landlords are not renting these apartments to our homeless population. That's why they're stuck in place in a shelter. We have got to make sure the City Human Rights Commission is actually looking at these issues. We need a much more urgent response to these landlords who are discriminating against homeless people. Link vouchers, number one. Second, we've got to get families with children out of these commercial hotels. It's dangerous. They shouldn't be there. There are no services for the children.
Where would you put them?
I would make use of the 1,300 vacant property in our New York City Public Housing Authority buildings. at least 1,300 vacancies. We could probably make room for 2,000 apartments that we could take many of the people who are working homeless and put them into NYCHA, which is safe and gives the homeless an opportunity to put their kids in a safe place. That's the second thing we should do. And long term, the city should establish a land bank land trust to look at the 1,100 vacant properties I audited. They've been vacant for 20 to 50 years. We've got to build low-income permanent housing, again, to reduce the homeless population. The land is vacant, it's city-owned. We should lease it to community-based organizations, and we should put them in the housing business, especially in the Bronx, where we can move people out of shelter and into permanent low-income housing.
You mentioned at the top of your statement there about what ought to be done, about a sense of urgency. Do you feel like the mayor doesn't feel that sense of urgency?
I think I think they feel a sense of frustration. What I've urged them to do is come up with a transparent plan where we can measure our progress, sometimes good, sometimes bad, and that he and his administration should work with this three-point program to be much more aggressive about actually getting things done. Rhetoric is okay, results are better, and that's what we're trying to put forth.
You could open up any newspaper in the city today, and in fact, you don't even have to open it up, because on the front page is talk about allegations of improprieties by the mayor. A Daily News investigation revealed that developers and others who had business with the city had been solicited and made sizable donations to the mayor's campaign for One New York. Sometimes these happen curiously on the very same day. Does this just look and smell bad, or are you concerned there could be real pay for play at the top of City Hall?
Well, look, right now, this is being investigated by federal and state prosecutors, so I'm not going to comment until the investigation is complete. Keep in mind that people are innocent until proven guilty, so I would wait for these investigations to conclude.
Concerns? Your eyebrows are raised a little bit, like goodness gracious?
I think that right now I'm not going to comment on a federal investigation, but just to remind people that there is a process where people are innocent, no charges have been brought, and I think I'm going to continue to work on the issues of audit and investigation, holding agencies accountable, making sure that we get the best bang for our taxpayer buck. And I think I've done a pretty good job holding the mayor and city agencies accountable, but also putting forth ideas on housing, education, healthcare. These are the issues that I care about.
Mm-hmm. We're going to continue analyzing some of your analyses right now. We continue to spend more on the city's jails, despite the fact that incarcerated population has fallen, yet the number of fights and violent incidents have gone up. You, like our new DA in the Bronx, Darcel Clark, have called for the closing of Rikers Island. It's very easy to say that, and everybody would say, well, it's been a hellhole for years, but what needs to be done to make that happen, and can that actually be done?
Well, I think we should explore the possibility of closing Rikers Island. I have continued to put forth analysis that shows that we have a reduced prison population, we have more violence, the cost of incarceration is now something like $132,000 an inmate. The structure of Rikers is so large, it's so vast, it's so old, that perhaps we have to think about smaller facility and use our land use and zoning opportunities to look where we can create a prison or a jail that meets the 21st century needs of the city.
Mm-hmm. I shudder to have you go around asking Bronx communities, would you like this situated in your neighborhood? Seems like a very difficult thing, not only in the Bronx, but anywhere in the city, to say, oh, now we're going to put a new correction facility in your neighborhood.
But I would argue that first we have to do the analysis of what's feasible. Cost obviously plays a role, but we also should bring together experts on prison reform and criminal justice issues, and think about ways to look at incarceration from a different vantage point. The prison population is going down. The cost violence is going up, and yet prison population down, violence up, costs to incarcerate on Rikers going way up. So clearly there's something wrong here, and we should explore all of our options, including closing Rikers.
Do you think that there are sufficient alternative to incarceration programs? This certainly has been, it was on, frankly, the previous Bronx DA's plate, and certainly the current Bronx DA has talked about alternatives to incarceration. Is that an avenue maybe to shrink the population and maybe change the tone at Rikers?
Well, no question. And look, we need bail reform. We need to keep people out of prison. That speaks to the kind of education opportunities, job opportunities. We don't want to see young people languish in our prisons, and we should have a plan to continue zero prison, or hope to get to a zero prison growth. Obviously, those that commit violent crimes and disregard the law should be prosecuted and sent to jail for a long time. But there's also people who we could prevent from entering into the correctional facilities, because once a kid goes in, you know, their life sometimes just never comes back. And I want to see what we can do to play a positive role in communities.
I reviewed the materials you put out about minority and women-owned businesses, and frankly, I was shocked. After all this time, and I've been, as you know, in this chair for a very long time, we've reviewed all the different development projects, and frankly, every single one, especially the large projects that come out, talk over and over about how this is going to be a boon from the city to minority and women-owned businesses, but yet your study says MWBEs account for only 4.8% of the city's total procurement. How can this be so?
Well, you know, when I became controller, I hired the city's chief diversity officer, asked that she take a look at procurement policies, meaning the city spends $15 billion a year hiring law firms, hiring accounting firms, hiring food vendors, buying paper clips, paper. So there's so many women and minority-owned firms that offer those services, and yet we don't contract with them, we don't hire them. And when you think about how you build wealth creation, well, it's a couple of things you have to do. The first is raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. I did the report that said if we were to do that, we would pump $10 billion into our economy. That's a good thing. But I also said that's not enough, raising the minimum wage. We have to have create wealth creation strategies in the Bronx and Brooklyn and other parts of the city. And the way to do that is to invest in women and minority-owned businesses. It is an economic multiplier when you have a business owned by different people of different backgrounds and communities. That means those businesses are going to hire locally and build the communities, create the wealth that allows people to stay in their homes, to give people an opportunity for employment. A lot of small businesses employ so many people. That's the number one employer. It's not the big guns. It's the middle and small businesses that matter.
When you talk to developers, when you talk to members of city agencies that are doing building projects, and you say, well, you know, how are you doing with minority and women-owned businesses? They'll say our problem is when we look at certification, not enough of them are certified. We can't even hire them if we wanted to, because legally we're not allowed to.
Well, that's not
do you
the
buy
answer.
that?
No, that's not the answer I'm looking for. We have thousands of certified MWBs. We should be certifying more. My office is has an outreach plan. We do this work every day with our chief diversity officer and her team. And we have to identify in city agencies how we contract with MWBs. I do a letter grade report, as you know, every year. Since my first year as controller, and we identify the spend with people, with vendors who have varied backgrounds, African American, Latino, Asian American, and women, and we can show the dismal record of these city agencies as they try to work with MWBs. I've lit a fire under these agencies, and every year I grade their performance, and I'm going to continue to do that. I believe fundamentally, if you invest in women and minority-owned businesses, you will create wealth in communities, hire more kids locally, and fundamentally transform communities. When you have a $15 billion spend from the city, and only 4.8% are going to businesses owned by people who look exactly like you and me, there's something wrong with that.
Do we need legislation? I mean, does it come down to something like affirmative action type legislation where we insist that before you can get a contract approved, this consideration has to be taken
There are
into account?
aspirational goals passed by the City Council, Local Law 1, and we should abide by those goals and see if we can meet them. When we don't, we should be alarmed, and that's why I put out this report every year to make sure that we are reaching out to women and minority-owned businesses, and I think it would have a big impact on our city and on our government.
Many municipalities, not only here in New York, but across the country, are concerned about the new president and the possibilities of cutting back on federal funding that we get. Are you concerned about how a Trump presidency might affect federal funding for the city? And if so, what concerns do you have?
Well, I'm concerned about the Trump presidency for sure, but I'm also concerned about the Trump presidency working in tandem with the Republican Congress. I did an economic analysis where we showed the city could lose up to $7 billion in federal aid. Much of that aid, believe it or not, is centered on a few important agencies that work to preserve our safety net for vulnerable citizens. So when you look at the federal dollars that we could lose, it's money that would go to Section 8 and NYCHA. It's money that would use for children and education. It's money that goes to helping our homeless population and other vulnerable people around the city. So we can't afford to lose up to $7 billion, which means we need a strategy with our congressional delegation to go to Washington, to put a line in the sand, to remind people that as New York City goes, so does the nation. And this is going to be a very tough fight for us. But look, we've been there before. We had a Republican president in the 70s that told New York to drop dead in the midst of our financial crisis. And there was a plan. There were elected officials and people in the private sector working with labor that came up with a plan for congressional loan guarantees that no one thought we could get from Republicans. And we were able to strategize, analyze, and put forth a plan that brought New York City back. So it's time to stop agonizing. It's now time to organize, do some organizing. And I hope that we could get to a place where we preserve the fundamental middle class and the vulnerable of our city.
Do you get the sense from your colleagues in government at other levels of government, in maybe congressional leaders or others around you, that they're ready to do that?
Yeah.
My sense is that everybody is doing what you said. They're like, oh my goodness, they're being kind of shocked and almost numb and not really in action right now.
The day for mourning the results is over. We're coming to the first of the year, and we have to get busy. And look, nothing has ever come easy for New York City, but we are a city worth fighting for. That's why we do this work, and I obviously was as disappointed in the results as everybody else, but what is what is, and we have to go and battle back and strategize, and I'm ready for the fight.
Businesses on Fifth Avenue are concerned because we are not only spending a lot on security at Trump Tower, but they are claiming, most recently in the newspapers, and you can really see it anywhere, that they're getting hurt because people are not coming into the area to even window shop, so they're not doing well. What should be done?
I went to tour the Trump area and talked to a lot of small business owners who really are struggling. There's not enough foot traffic. The deliveries that can't get through are really hurting small businesses. I made the point that we owe those small businesses a fair shot to make it, and I'm urging the city to work with those businesses, meet with them, listen to what I've been listening to, and that's why I did the survey. We've surveyed 50 businesses. People think that it's only the big stores that are impacted, but there are delis and electronic stores, laundry stores. I mean, that's a community as well, and we have to help those small businesses.
One Bronx question, and then we'll wrap it up. The Kingsbridge Armory is still dormant. The latest news was that Koenig, the developer, has offered to buy the property. The price tag was something like $17 million. Would you recommend the city sell them the property, if nothing else, to get it moving forward? And especially for those who are anxious to see it get underway. Is that a proper avenue to go?
Well, look, I would like to see that space dealt with in a positive way for the community and the city. But I will certainly monitor the situation, but I haven't really drilled down as to the specifics.
Political blogs are all saying Scott Stringer would like to be the mayor of the city of New York. I would not be doing my job if I didn't say so. Do you at least have interest? Are you eyeing the seat and certainly monitoring the situation that the mayor is in right now?
Look, I have to tell you, serving as controller is a tremendous honor and responsibility. It's a job I take very seriously. I think we've built an office where people know we've got their backs. As the chief watchdog of New York, there's a lot to do. Obviously, I know that one has to turn attention to the politics of 2017, but I still am not there yet. We're still doing my job, and I know at some point we'll be able to talk about politics, just not today.
And you'll come back on this show and tell us all about it.
Absolutely.
You really have always been a willing participant in the dialogue.
It's a great show, and we really love being in the Bronx, and it's a great place.
Happy holidays
Thank
to
you.
you, sir.
Thank you.
Folks, if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, and email them to us at BronxTalk@BronxNet.org, or put them on our Facebook page, or you can send a tweet to @BronxTalk, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. Of course, you can like us on Facebook and check out our archives at BronxNet.org. We're on the lower right navigation bar. Next week for the holiday, we'll do a Best of Bronx Talk 2016. The week after, for New Year's, a photographer's look at the Bronx. So thanks to producer Jayla Juberis and director Brianna Roller. Happy holidays to you and yours. Peace. That's how we do it. We'll see.
The city comptroller Scott Stringer gave Mayor Bill de Blasio a failing grade on city spending with minority and women-owned businesses. The city's comptroller Scott Stringer and his chief diversity officer Cara Wallace held a press conference and a roundtable discussion announcing how minority and women-owned businesses can meet the grade.
The problem is not a lack of MWBEs in New York City. In fact, there are upwards of 500,000 minority-owned and 400,000 women-owned businesses in this town. But only 4,527, less than 1%, are certified to do business with the city. That's a deficit we need to address. But further, our analysis found just 994 of these certified firms received city spending in FY16. It's not only hurting our small business owners, it's a missed opportunity for the entire city economy. Because when we invest in our small businesses, they invest in their neighborhoods, and our economy gets stronger. It's local wealth creation that eventually lifts everybody up, and that's exactly what we need more of.
Comptroller Scott Stringer pointed out that in order to grow the economy throughout the city, there needs to be a comprehensive, all-inclusive MWB development program across all city agencies, a true mentorship program, and a way to guarantee that firms get paid on time, every time, and the list continues.
We got to develop a strategy across city government and further accountability regarding MWB spending. We need to streamline the MWB certification process. We got to create a universal certification application across local, state, federal MWB programs. We need to follow this roadmap in a way that we coordinate with all the city agencies, and we cannot wait any longer to get to work.
However, his ideal suggestion to help level the playing field with all businesses is to appoint a chief diversity officer in the city that will work full-time and will report directly to the mayor. Comptroller Scott Stringer moved to a roundtable discussion, and here is why.
We procure goods and services, we hire law firm, accounting firms, we spend on construction. And when the spend on billions of dollars or $15 billion is only 4.8%. That's just not acceptable. And so maybe you can tell me or guide us what should we be doing more of? What should we be doing differently? And if there's things that are going well and we're just not seeing the results yet, I want to know it too.
The comptroller is working on increasing the city's percentage towards the WMBEs and acknowledging that there needs to be a change in the state's law. On the other hand, WMBEs are urged to get educated on the programs that the city has and how to access it in order to make the grade. For BronxNet, this is Kato Loy-Knight.
What does a police officer do when they're in a precinct or on the street? Close to 100 students at Richard Green Middle School in the Wakefield section got an up-close and personal look into this thanks to special guest commanding officer of the 47th Precinct, Inspector Raul Stevenson, who introduced his colleagues and others charged with keeping the peace.
We have youth here between the age of 12 to 16 who are the future. And we understand that we need to do a better job establishing a dialogue between the youth to bring them closer to the police department so that they understand better the work that we do, and that the work that we do so often affect them, and they need to be part of the conversation.
Founder of the Bronx Youth Empowerment Program, current City Councilperson Andy King, who has long worked to improve police and community relations within his district, organized the forum, calling it an opportunity to engage, educate, and equip a new generation of students coming up.
It's not an us and them scenario. Young teens, young children should look at NYPD officers as someone for support and someone who can help them develop themselves, not someone they should fear and someone who is the enemy.
The talk began with introductions, followed by ways on how to identify the various units within the police department, including the emergency services and canine units, and the role of a detective as opposed to a police officer. Among those taking it all in, 7th grader Gabriela Sanchez.
I think today is going to be really nice. I think it's going to connect with most of the teenagers in our area.
And Tayana Ayers.
Like it's important today? You feel it's important to get to know your local police officer?
Yeah.
Why?
Because you never know, you might run into them and something might happen and you can rely on them.
They also want these students to know that college scholarships are available through their cadet program, and the Explorers Club is all about building a solid future as a leader. It just so happens that Explorer Jeremiah here in the 11th grade is doing what the department hopes all in their programs do, one day join their ranks.
My goal is to graduate high school within the next year, go into the military. I want to join the Marine Corps, and then when I come out, I want to be a police officer with the NYPD.
And police officer Cassandra Melendez, a youth officer in the 47th Precinct, oversees the program.
The dreams that these children have and the dreams that the kids in our community have are all possible. We just need to all get together and work together. The parents, the businesses, the churches, and the police officers, in order to just mold these kids and let them know that their dreams are possible. He can accomplish anything.
Also address the 4th and 5th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution, securing protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, and the right to due process, even as police use probable cause as their basis for asking questions and pursuing leads. Taking the mystery out of policing and letting these students know that they can be partners in helping to keep their neighborhoods safe is what this workshop is all about. For BronxNet, this is Arlene Makoko.
Morning, Gary. We are GetSchooled.com. You want a college education, don't you? Gary, financial aid forms. Biology homework, G. Picking a college, man. You and us go together like tacos and Tuesday.
And I love tacos.